In this section of the lecture, we're going to talk about the cerebellum. That you can see it here, and it's maybe you know that is known as the little brain because it's the second in size, yeah, after the cerebrum in the brain. And we're going to talk about the structure, the location again, and just from a very general perspective, remember that it's in charge of coordinating different movements, yeah, coordinating in posture, balance, and even in motor learning. So let's start with the information about the cerebellum. So now let's talk about very general aspect of the cerebellum. I already told you that the cerebellum is the second largest component of the brain after the cerebrum. The second thing that we can observe here is the location. And just if you look at the cranial cavity, yeah, in the cranial cavity, you see that it is located inferior and also it is located anterior. Okay, and you can compare with different parts, components of our region. You can say that is posterior to the medulla oblongata and the pons, or you can say that the cerebrum is superior to the cerebellum and compared to different areas. Okay, now we talk about size, location. Now let's talk about the structure. And in the structure, there are the cerebrum and cerebellum have something similar. That if you see is that they are highly folded structures. If you see them, it looks like they have wrinkles. And why they are wrinkles? Yeah, why they have this high surface? Because it would allow to increase the surface area. So when you have a high surface area, what you're going to have is more space to add more neurons there. And finally, another interesting generality of the cerebellum is that although it represents only 1/10 of the size of the entire brain, although the second one is only 1/10, when you look at the number of neurons of the entire brain, it has almost half of the brain. So yeah, approximately half. So it's a region where there is a lot of concentration of neurons. Now, let's recap all the information that I told you. I'm going to delete this and be back. Okay, now I'm back, and I told you that when we look at the size, the cerebellum is second only after the cerebrum in size. Then I told you that the location that we can compare respectively to the cranial cavity, and it will be in the inferior and posterior, and you can also compare it to different parts of the brain, yeah, compare it to the brain stem in this area that it will be posterior, or you can say that is compared to the cerebrum and use all the terminology that we learned in the in the first chapter. Okay, now when we talk about the structure, I told you that this is both cerebrum and cerebellum are highly folded in their surface, and this allows us to increase the surface area of its outer gray matter cortex. So this allows it to have a great number of neurons. And this is very important because here in the brain, for example, and here you're going to have many functions, and we will discuss that later on in the following slides. In this slide, I want to show you some anatomical details of this cerebellum. So here you can have a superior view, and here in the other one you will see an inferior view. So those two views, you can find it also in your textbook. I took this diagram that is a little bit simpler, but you can see many more structures there. So first thing that I wanted to tell you here is that there is two hemispheres. So there is one hemisphere here, and there is a second hemisphere here. There is one here, and there is the second one here. So those two hemispheres are located, can be seen in the superior, and they can also be seen um, in the two different views. Now, the second structure that I wanted to tell you is this one. That is this narrow bridge that is connecting the two hemispheres. And so you can see it also in the inferior view here. Now I'm going to talk about the third structure that you can see here, that is only seen in the inferior view, that is these uh, these lobules that can only be seen in the inferior view in the anterior portion and close to the vermis. Finally, you can see there are many more structures in your textbook. They, for example, describe here that there are anterior lobes. Here you can see kind of this slide will be the posteriors, also lobes, and you can also see it in the from the inferior view. But now I don't want to get into too much detail. I just want to remind you the three things that I explained here. So I told you that there are two hemispheres, yeah, similar to the cerebrum. I also told you that when we talk about the connection between those two, there's a structure called the vermis that it can be seen in both sides. And finally, I told you that there is something called cerebellar tonsils that are two distinguishable lobules that are only seen from the inferior view. Now let's go and talk about three key structures that can only be seen from the inferior view, that are the cerebral peduncles. In this slide, we are going to talk about these structures called the cerebellar peduncles. And those ones are formed by efferent and afferent axons. In other words, they are bundles of white matter that allow the cerebellum to attach to other parts of the brain, yeah, and in this case, in particular, with the brainstem. So some of them will connect to the pons, some other ones connect to the medulla oblongata, and some ones will connect to the midbrain. And you can divide it in three main regions. So I color coded for you, so it's simpler. First one, it will be the superior. Second one, it will be the middle, that is in the red area, that is the largest there. And finally, the third one will be the inferior. Okay, so let's recap all the information that I told you here. If somebody asks you what are the cerebellar peduncles, you will say that there are bundles of white matter that that they allow to attach the cerebellum to the brainstem. And I told you that each one of these three components, the superior, the middle, and the inferior divisions, will help to attach the cerebellum to these different regions of the brainstem. And here you can see that those regions of the cerebellum, yeah, so from number 2, they will have signals that they go back and forth with different regions of the brain. In particular, we are going to talk about the brainstem. But in your textbook, there will be even more information that you can expand all the things that I'm telling you. So now to finish this section of the cerebellar peduncles, I'm just going to make you try to make a connection between different regions of the brainstem. So the superior peduncles will interact with the superior part of the brainstem. So it will interact with the midbrain. So here you can see that it's interacting with the midbrain. The middle peduncles will interact with the pons, and the inferior peduncle will interact with the lower part, with the inferior part of the brainstem. So with this area, that it will be the medulla oblongata. Now we're going to talk about the structure, but we're going to use this median plane. Yeah, we're going to cut in half to try to understand what are the different components of the cerebellum. And to do that, I am going to take this diagram of your textbook. There are many more names. I just tried to simplify it in case that you wanted to read this in more detail and see all the other names. You can go to your textbook. Uh, Here, key information that I wanted to tell you is that if you go and look in the outer region of the cerebellum, you are going to start finding gray matter. So here it will be gray matter, gray matter, gray matter. So this will be opposite what we have in the spinal cord and in the brainstem. Yeah, so here you will find gray matter, and they want that you know that in your textbook. In addition to that, inside you will see these structures, the folia that look like leaves. So here you will find in red the folia, and there you will have gray matter combined uh, with a little bit of white matter too. And inside you will have this white matter. So again, your textbook wanted that if you look here in yellow, they really want that you remember that area, that section, that this arbor vitae or arbor vitae, if you wanted to pronounce it in Latin or not. So you will have here in yellow those tracks. Yeah. So here, remember, here you will have white matter, and here you will have gray matter. Again, this is opposite to what we have in the spinal cord as we talked before. So cerebellum and cerebrum, we're going to have the location of the white and gray matter will be opposite. In addition to that, we're going to have a structure called the transverse cerebellar fissure. And very simple, here you will have a fissure between that separate the cerebrum, and here the cerebellum. Okay, so here this one will be located in this area. Okay, so I told you about two things. Right now, gray matter and white matter are located in different places, and those regions, each one of those have different names. Some of them look like trees or leaves of plants, and that there is a future there. To finish with that, with this area, we already talked about the peduncles, the cerebral peduncles, and remember here you don't have an excellent view of that from this median section, but they just wanted to show you that if you remember the brain stem, so here you have the brain stem, and the brain stem need to be is attached to the cerebellum, and we talk about all the connections of the superior, median, and inferior cerebral peduncles. So here they are just showing you that they are there to communicate. So now we're going to talk about the functions of the cerebellum. So I have been telling you multiple times that the cerebellum is involved of the coordination of skeletal muscle movements. So if there's an injury in the cerebellum, the movements will not be as coordinated, and there will not be fluid between the movements. In addition to that, it's very important in the maintenance of muscle tone, posture, and balance. Now we're going to move into another section of the brain. We're going to talk about the diencephalon. And if you see here, I have a diagram and also a picture of the diencephalon. And we are going, if you see all these structures that are here together that form the central core of the brain tissue. So here we're going to talk about the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and even a little bit about the pituitary gland. And so let's start right now with a very general perspective. So I already told you that this region in green is the diencephalon, and that it formed the central core of the brain tissue. If you analyze the location, here is the midbrain. So the diencephalon is just superior to the midbrain, And if you see, most of the diencephalon is covered by the cerebral hemisphere. And if you want to see in more detail where it is located, so it goes from the here the brainstem to the cerebrum, and in particular here is surrounded by the third ventricle, as we studied before. So now, if you remember this diagram that we discussed before and all these names, now we know we have talked about most of them. And now we're going to talk about, from a general perspective, about these three components of the diencephalon. The diencephalon as a whole contains numerous nuclei that involve a wide variety of sensory and motor processings between higher and lower brain centers. And it includes this area, the first one that represents most of the diencephalon, that is the thalamus. Below the thalamus, yeah, always below the thalamus, remember, is the hypothalamus. And pretty easy, hypo means lower in Latin, yeah, sorry, in Greek. So this is why many many times when you hear the prefix hypo means lower. And here, number third, in this area you will find the pineal gland, and that is a part of the epithalamus. Okay, so remember, from a general perspective, there will be numerous nuclei, and we will cover all this sensory and motor processing of each one of these three components that are the thalamus, hypothalamus, and finally the epithalamus. So let's start with the first component of the diencephalon, that is the thalamus. And here they offer you two diagrams from your textbook that show you the lateral view. And in the lateral view, you can see the thalamus here. In the medial view, also you can see the thalamus here. So first thing that I want to tell you, the location. So where is the location of the thalamus? The thalamus is above, yeah, in between the midbrain and the cerebrum again, and is superior to the midbrain. Okay, so and now that we know the location, let's talk about the functions. So what are the functions of the thalamus? So here again, you will hear this relay station. Yeah, so when we talk about relay station, is that is receiving and sending signals to the cortex of the brain. So here in the following slides, I will show you that each one of these colors, I just write in numbers there, you will see 7 regions. Yeah, all those are going to be in communication with the thalamus, and all these nuclei of the thalamus will allow to that all the sensory impulses go through the thalamus except the smell. And in the following slide, we will talk about more functions. Well, for example, in your textbook, you can look that the thalamus is involved in interpreting general awareness. So let's write here awareness, and also other functions that is part of the fight and flight response. Also aspects of the emotion and memory and consciousness are also found in the thalamus. So to summarize, I just told you the location of the thalamus is in between the midbrain and the cerebrum, and I told you it is superior to the midbrain. And in addition to that, there are many functions, but the main function is relay station for all the sensory impulses. And I also talk about other functions like interpreting awareness, consciousness, and memory, and emotions. Now let's talk about in more detail about each one of those nuclei in the thalamus. So let's keep talking about the structure of the thalamus, and I already told you they're oval masses. So here you can see the two oval masses that represent around 80% of the diencephalon. I also told you that here in gray you can see the cerebrum, all the cerebrum cortex, And you to communicate the gray matter of the cortex with you have white matter, and in this case are the internal capsules, and they go through the uh, thalamus. Yeah, so the thalamus, this is why we always say that the thalamus is a relay station. Yeah, so here I have this diagram that I wanted to show in more detail what is happening. Yeah, so for example here in the beginning where you're going to have this stimulate, yeah, stimulate, and here you're going to have the cortex of the brain, yeah, the cortex of the, sorry, cerebrum. So what you're going to have is many relay stations, yeah. So here you're going to have white matter, white tracks, and here you're going to have white tracks that will be communicating the signal back and forth, yeah. But you need to have relay stations that allow to send that information to the cerebrum to be processed. In the case of the thalamus, here these white tracks, they are known as internal capsule. Okay, hopefully this is clear and this helps you to understand much better how all this central nervous system works. Now we're going to talk about all these nuclei that we have in the thalamus. And remember, in the thalamus, we have this cluster of densely packed neuronal cell bodies. And here in your textbook, they show you some of those nuclei. We are not going to cover all of them, and you don't have to memorize all the functions. I'm just going to tell you that they exist, and I'm going to show you a video that summarizes all the information of the thalamus, and it's going to talk briefly about the most important of these nuclei. Again, you don't have to memorize every single one or every single function.
Welcome to 2-Minute Neuroscience, where I simplistically explain neuroscience topics in 2 minutes or less. In this installment, I will discuss the thalamus. There is a thalamus in each cerebral hemisphere just above the brainstem. The thalamus is often described as a relay station because a great deal of information that proceeds to the cerebral cortex first stops in the thalamus before being sent on to its destination. The thalamus is subdivided into a number of nuclei that possess functional specializations for dealing with particular types of information. For example, all sensory information except olfaction travels directly from sensory receptors to a nucleus in the thalamus specialized for dealing with that type of sensory data. Then the information is sent from the thalamus to the appropriate area of the cortex where it is further processed. As many as 50 distinct nuclei have been identified in the thalamus, but I will discuss just a few of the better known nuclei in this video. Each of these nuclei has multiple functions. I will only mention one or two of the best known functions here. At the anterior of the thalamus is a nucleus called the anterior nucleus. It is extensively connected to the hippocampus and is thought to be involved in memory. The dorsomedial nucleus is thought to be involved in emotional behavior and memory. The ventral anterior nucleus and ventrolateral nucleus are thought to be involved in motor functions. The ventral posterolateral nucleus, or VPL, and the ventral posteromedial nucleus, or VPM, both act as relay nuclei for sending somatosensory information to the somatosensory cortex. The lateral posterior nucleus is thought to be involved with integrating sensory input and associating it with cognitive functions. The pulvinar nucleus is a large nucleus that is involved in processing visual stimuli. The medial geniculate nucleus and the lateral geniculate nucleus serve as important relays for auditory and visual information, respectively. The reticular nucleus forms a sheet that makes up the outer covering of the thalamus. It influences the activity of other nuclei within the thalamus. There are also a number of nuclei not visible in this image, such as the centromedian nucleus, which is thought to be involved in attention and arousal.
So now let's talk about the hypothalamus. That is the second structure that we're going to discuss of the diencephalus. And so let's start talking about the location. So the location of the hypothalamus, as we previously said, the prefix hypo means lower, inferior, so this structure it will be inferior to the thalamus. The structure, so in this schematic, what I wanted to show you, or what your textbook is showing you, is that there are four main areas, so 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you see if they are color coded in this diagram. One is the posterior, then intermediate, anterior, and preoptic region. So here in the diagram, this will be the posterior, here it will be the intermediate, and this will be the anterior area. And finally, here is the purple one is the preoptic region. Related to the function, so the function of the hypothalamus is mainly one of the major regulators of homeostasis. Although there is many more functions, if you remember that one is one of those one that is key. So far I told you that the location of the hypothalamus is inferior to the thalamus. I also told you that there are four major regions that here in your diagram are color coded, and that the functions, that although you can look that the hypothalamus is regulating many body activities, one of them that I think is fundamental is one of the major regulator of homeostasis in the body. Just as a reminder, similar to the thalamus, the hypothalamus have a lot of nuclei, and many of them are in your textbook. I didn't show you those ones to not make it more complicated. Uh, what I want to show you is that in the next slide, I will show you that the thalamus is involved in many functions. Please remember the one of regulating homeostasis, but in all these nuclei will be involved in all these functions. So if you study neuroanatomy later, or you specialize in in neuroscience or something like that, you will learn about this. But right now, please don't. There's no need to memorize all these names. If there is a question, remind me and I will remove them from the test. So functions. So we already talked that homeostasis was very important, but of course there will be more functions. So some of them will be endocrine functions, so the production of hormones. The hypothalamus is involved in the production of many hormones. Ones that are very important is the oxytocin and the ADH. So the oxytocin, for example, is in charge of regulating all the sensory organs. In addition, is related to when a mom, for example, has a baby. There is a release of oxytocin that allow the mom to have a stronger connection to the baby. And let's say that from a simplistic view, you can say that some people call it like the love hormone. Yeah, that if you reduce love as a chemical response, this will be the responsible. So during sex, after sex, you release a lot of oxytocin, and this is the one that make those connection. So so the oxytocin is involved into that. So now another hormone is the ADH that is involved in the of regulating the homeostasis in the nucleus, and is sorry, in the kidney, and is involved in the reabsorption of water. Finally, we already talked about homeostasis, so body temperature is regulated by the hypothalamus, as well as other regulation centers, like when you are hungry and you, or when you say like this is enough, I ate enough. This is controlled by the hypothalamus. So far, we have talked about three main regions of the diencephalon. The first one that we talked was the one in blue, the thalamus. The second one that is inferior or below to the thalamus is the hypothalamus. And finally, we are going to go in one that is above, yeah, or superior, and is also posterior. Yeah, so as is above, it will be epithalamus. So the epithalamus, as I said, the location is superior and posterior to the thalamus, and also in the epithalamus contain a, a gland that is called the pineal gland, that we will talk about the functions in the following slide. So now let's focus on the pineal gland. And here in this diagram, I just wanted to focus on the main job of the pineal gland that we're going to talk today, is the secretion of a hormone. And this hormone is called melatonin. Melatonin. So here you can see the structure. And this melatonin is a hormone that is called the sleep hormone because it's in charge of regulating the sleep pattern. So they will be, if the sun is out, there will be more sunlight. I mean, if there is more sunlight, there will be low production of melatonin. However, during the night, during the night, the opposite what happened. So you will feel sleepy because there will be more production of melatonin. So it is studies that are suggesting that there could be correlation with happier mood, the presence of melatonin, and that melatonin, proper regulation of melatonin, can lead to a better sleep patterns. So it's a very important hormone. And just remember, melatonin is very different from melanin. Melatonin is a hormone that controls the sleep. Melanin is a pigment that is related to the pigmentation of the skin, eyes, and hair. Okay, so just to recap, I told you we were going to study the pineal gland, and that the pineal gland main function that we're going to focus in this slide is that it secretes melatonin. I also told you that depending on the sunlight, you will have or lower melatonin when there is a lot of sunlight. However, when you're going to go to sleep and you feel asleep, is because as there is darkness, there will be an increase in the melatonin production, and this is why you say it's time to go to sleep. And there is a lot of studies that are discussing, okay, this could we regulate better the melatonin, and do we have better pattern of sleeps? This will lead to happier mood or not. And finally, something that I didn't tell you before is that in addition to the melatonin, there is also called havenular nuclei that are involved in the olfaction. So remember, there are so many nuclei that we will talk. That we're talking the thalamus, hypothalamus, and this one is important also in the pineal gland. Now we're going to finish this section of the diencephalon and talk about this structure called circumventricular organs. And they are located in the encephalon, and they have a main difference with other regions of the brain, because if you remember, we talk about these BBBs. Do you remember what they are? They are blood brain barriers. And if you remember, the blood uh, is not a good environment for the neurons to develop, to grow, to perform all their functions. So, in addition to that, it's not a good idea that blood can bring infection, virus, and other things, and it can infect the brain. So, we have a way to prevent some chemicals to enter and exit the brain, and one of those is these blood-brain barriers. The difference between the circumventricular regions and other regions is that they lack of these blood-brain barriers. Why? Because I told you that the pineal glands, for example, they secrete, so they will be secreting uh, melatonin, and I told you that other regions uh, of the diencephalon will have endocrine function, and they will secrete, for example, oxytocin. So to secrete all these hormones, you need to get rid of these things. So there will be, instead of that, there will be capillaries, that they will be leaky capillaries that will have a fenestration and will allow these chemicals, these hormones, to go outside. In addition, these chemicals, these capillaries allowed to be monitor the blood and see if there is any change in chemicals. There are around 7 different structures here, 7 different CVOs, but we are not going to cover all of them. I just wanted to know that you know that they exist. I just wanted to tell you, for example, that they are located in glands like the pineal gland, that they are located in the posterior pituitary gland, and they will be in other regions of the body. So let's recap. I told you what it was a CVO, and a CVO, a circumventricular organs, are a part of the diencephalon that have this particularity that they are able to monitor changes in the blood, chemical changes in the blood, because they lack of this blood brain barrier. So these ones are not going to be there. And there are many, there are around 7, and we are going to focus here in the pineal gland and in the pituitary gland that are the ones that are located in this diagram. So, and how they perform their function, I told you these, they have capillaries, but these capillaries, instead of having this BBB, they are leaky because they have fenestrations. And their main function of this CV is coordinate homeostatic activities, because, as I said, and we talked before, in the diencephalon, there is a lot of hormones involved in endocrine system and different function of the neural system.